Eek, eek. Good morning, everybody. It's time for Protecting the Nest. Good morning, Carol.
Good morning, John. I guess we're going to have a smaller show today because both Tara and Amber are busy with school stuff, starting up and getting ready. So, anyway, such as it is, here we are, you and me. So great.
Well,
Let's
we
get
still
going.
have a lot to talk about.
There's so much going on. It's very cool. I really am kind of enjoying, even though some of it's really creepy, horrible stuff. There's so much that's coming out. It just really is the snowball gathering momentum, and it's so gratifying for us who've been working so hard for so many years to see it happen. It's just really, really great. And well, go ahead. You talk a little bit, and then we have a video clip that's interesting.
Well, yeah, one encouraging thing I noticed this week is several times I heard people using the word they. They don't want this to happen, or they want such and such to happen. That's a very European thing because in Europe, we're accustomed to using the they. For example, years and years ago, a uh, one of the young men that I was coaching from an entrepreneurship standpoint, he had an idea for a ferry that would go across the Mediterranean taking merchandise at around 48 knots, but it would cost just a little more than the average cost of a container ship, per ton kilometer. And and he did a lot of work on this project, right? And he managed to get 5,000 euro financing and then another 10,000. But then some venture, small time venture capitalists told him to forget about it because no one would ever. They don't want it.
Well,
And
they is interesting pronoun, of course, because now that's one of the pronouns that people are using instead of he or her or she and it's a hard one to use this, be speaking about a singular person and not doing it with plural. It's difficult, but there's also laws that are coming up that say if you screw up on the pronouns, it's against the law. So I don't think they've passed, but there's actually legislation like that out there.
is
So
that
it's,
on a state level or a federal level?
I believe it's federal. So yeah, I think some of the speech things that are coming up are federal, saying that rather than letting social media police what is truth and what is not truth, that it's going to come through the government instead. Like
Right.
that'll be better since the government was already, the FBI, the CIA were already the ones that were really saying who could do what. And there was even pushback from some of the social media companies saying, wait a minute, that's not illegal. So now we're going to have the government doing it all by themselves. Yay, what a great idea.
Yeah.
They're
Anytime
still
the government
trying
gets
hard.
involved, things go haywire.
Yeah. But speaking of all the laws kind of changing without us knowing, that's certainly happening in regards to the WHO. We've been watching that for a while. Uh, well, right in 2020, the first time we all got together was we noticed that the WHO was getting all the bids for this whole pandemic thing. So that was a clue right there way early on. But now the pandemic uh, treaty is really taking away sovereignty for everybody in the world and giving it to the WHO and the UN. So we can imagine what's coming. And I have a great clip to start out with
But
Mara
I just
Liv.
want to preempt that with for our newest subscribers, I want to underline the fact that the World Health Organization is supposed to be a very open, network, loosely connected network of health advisors in the various countries, participating nations. But actually, it's looking more and more like a small group of people, the ones we talked about the last few episodes, is controlling a lot of pulling the strings at the World Health Organization. And the name, I'm drawing a blank. Virginia, Oh, what's her
But
last?
the Bananas.
Bananas, right? Virginia Bananas is comes from a family, a very prominent family in Europe, and it was shocking to me 3 years ago when you and the others discovered this in March 2020, that this particular Virginia was getting all the bids for the epidemic.
Well, she wasn't the only one. They also went to Sina Bavari at the same time, who was at that moment still, I think, the director of U.S. AMRID, although maybe he'd already been fired and was being an independent consultant. I don't know. But one of the things that's happened in the WHO just in the last, I don't know, decade or so, is that more and more of its funding has come from foundations, and it has earmarks on it too. So a lot of who's pulling those strings are really the giant big pharmaceutical companies and the foundations that roll out of that. And the profits are, the strings are going to make more profits for the companies that are associated with the foundation. So it's just corruption at a really high level. And we're seeing a lot of that with organizations that are supposed to be, helping the people get, in that case, get healthy. But for other giant organizations like the CDC and the FDA that we assume are government organizations run for the benefit of the people, but in fact, they're not government organizations. They are now, just like the WHO, primarily their funding comes from the corporate structure. So the things that are changing politically in the background that we don't know and we don't even have representation to with the WHO. Like we have just a few delegates. We don't even know who they are. We don't know what their opinions are. They're not like our representatives that we elect that we know who they are. They're just a few random specially selected folks. So it is a really
Right.
important organization.
Yeah, but it's just like the IMF and the World Bank.
Mm-hmm.
Ultimately, the funding for the people who sit in the very comfortable chairs on the top floor are getting taxpayer money. Well, actually, it's money from, for example, the Rockefeller Foundation, but it entrails a whole lot of taxpayer money from the U.S., from Canada, from Europe.
Mm-hmm.
And the taxpayer money is used to pay all of these people to do what we assumed was, to protect our health, to protect our finances. And then we find out that in actuality, it's creating private enterprises, and the profits go into the Rockefellers, Carnegies, and the DuPonts.
Yeah, it's just a closed loop system, and we're not really in that loop except as, prey, really, or exploited for profits. They don't really care about us. So anyway, it's definitely worth looking at in order to protect our nest. How can we do that? Well, we have to be able to see what's going on, what's coming down, and for organizations with more and more power going towards them, especially with this pandemic treaty, they have power over our sovereign government, over us as human beings. Our inalienable rights are being stripped by these quasi governmental organizations. So that's why it matters, because they're saying you can't even talk about this. If you say vitamin C, we're going to take you off the internet. That happened really early on. Literally, you couldn't say vitamin C on the internet without being, getting a takedown. So there's more of that coming if they get this power. So looking at it, pointing our fingers, and also, I mean, Meryl Nass does a really great job of pointing out a lot of it, but there's plenty of stuff in this short clip that she doesn't address, for whatever reasons. I mean, there's only 2 minutes, but let's look at it and then we can talk about what else is coming down that she's not talking about too.
Okay.
Undergoing a soft coup. And the idea is to create a whole new set of laws and ignore the existing human rights laws and other laws under the pretext of pandemic preparedness and the biosecurity agenda. The WHO is developing through all its nations, but with the WHO directorate in the United States in charge, a pandemic treaty and amendments to the existing international health regulations that will remove the human rights protections currently embedded in the IHRs, will enforce surveillance, censorship, get rid of freedom of speech, require governments to censor and only push a single narrative. Also, we will be subject, if they can make this work, to vaccines developed in 100 days, which the organization CEPI is planning to do. And one of the people who founded CEPI was Jeremy Farrar, who is now the chief scientist at the WHO to bring this forward. Other things that the amendments do is to bind the states so they're no longer recommendations, but enforceable edicts. Provide a liability shield, get rid of intellectual property rights, move supplies from one country to another, enforce digital passports, and the Director General of WHO can demand that a pandemic or a potential pandemic exists. He can just declare it with no standards, and then countries around the world will have to obey. Also, the WHO will tell you what drugs you can and can't use in your nation once a pandemic is declared. Obviously, the budget will increase. One Health is another part of this. One Health is a concept that was created to enable the WHO, with these documents, to take over jurisdiction of everything in the world by saying that climate change, animals, plants, water systems, ecosystems are all central to health. Also embedded in this concept is a peculiar notion that humans are no longer of greater value than animals.
Well, she was pretty articulate there. And just a little background on Meryl Nass. She's a doctor, and she has been very, very involved in Gulf War syndrome and really sort of being a whistleblower on what that is, what those symptoms are, how many people have gotten it, including people that didn't even deploy to Iraq, including the people that just joined up, got the injections, and didn't even go there. So that was a real important clue that these injections are dangerous in and of themselves. It's not just being exposed to all the stuff you'd be exposed to during an active war. But she's controversial. She's friends with some of the people that our group has pointed out is very instrumental in doing some of these issues. But she was speaking, she had opportunity to speak to the European Parliament, and she was really articulate, and I think she did a good job. And she did mention the surveillance part of it, but not quite all the details. Some of the stuff I think that she didn't have an opportunity to address, or didn't for whatever reasons, is that these are untested injections that embed synthetic biology to enable tracking and tracing of behavior with AI. So it's AI directed, and that's what's happening now and what is being developed too. And that part of what we're hearing from the 5th generation warfare folks is it is to find, fix, and finish the people that object. So ultimately, there's another part of it too that is, not quite there yet, but moving really fast. That they can harvest our DNA for their purposes, and the mitochondria, which is energy, as well. And so they can use our bodies as like a thumb drive to help with the storing information for the AI. And this is really creepy, but there's actually scientific papers and you probably know about this too, and to use our bodies as a battery to actually use electricity and to store information. That DNA is the storage, like the next storage device, because how powerful it is. So anyway, when you hear safe and effective over and over and over, we have to ask, who is it safe for? Who is it effective for? It isn't us. That's not who they're talking about with that language. So
well,
it's not
it might actually be effective, but effective in which way?
Yeah, it's effective for the predators, not for the prey. That's what we have become now. We're no longer sovereign beings with inalienable rights. It puts us on the level of a lab rat, basically. So there was a lot in that, what she said, and there's more to say about it too, just so we know what's coming, how to brace yourself, how to talk about it, what's being said and what's not being said, but we know is happening.
Well, we knew that this was coming because the power elite in Europe back around in the 1910s and 1920s wrote hundreds of books, at least 250 books, on what is going to happen to the population when we get to be 18 billion or 20 billion. And they talked to for hours on end, because there was no television, there was no Netflix, so they would discuss till late in the evening about how to fix this problem of overpopulation. And that is why they set up the League of Nations. That is why they eventually set up the IMF. And they told us why.
Mm-hmm.
They said that we have to have a solution. And since we are the nobility, we are the big people, we will decide for everyone else which way this is going to go. You don't get to vote. They told us that, and they have been dropping hints for the past 20 years, letting us know what's going on. But it's a slow boil, the boiling frog analogy.
Well, I think you're exactly right, because it does go back. Even if you look even back in the 1700s and the potato famine, that was something that was pushed by the British. The potato blight, where lots of people in Ireland and Scotland died, and the potatoes still kept going to Britain, but many people died, and it was because of the terrible overpopulation then, way back when there was hardly anybody compared to now. So this idea of population explosion is a very, very old one. There's too many people. We're going to have to selectively cull the herds. But, who gets culled? The people that see it coming are definitely targeted. So you need to do something. Get active. But that's a great speech. I think people can maybe pass that around. So be sure to put it in the links, because it's something I think anybody can hear. She's speaking to the European Parliament in really clear language, so it's positive. Oh, you're on mute, I think.
Yes, I will put that in the notes to the show. But the European Parliament itself is going to change character over the next few years. As they have to relinquish more and more control to these paragovernmental or pan governmental agencies. The standard MP, European MP, is going to have less and less voice in what happens to his nation or her nation, and the WHO and IMF and the World Bank will, and let's not forget the Bank of International Settlements that's rarely talked about. They will have more and more control.
Yeah, things are changing, I think, and I think if the European Parliament gets up in arms and understands what's happening, they can make a difference. And it's definitely changing Africa right now. Niger is having a big uprising, and it's against the US and it's against France. And they're saying, get out right now. And they're in alignment with several other African countries. And more African countries are aligning with Russia rather than the UN and the US. So things are shifting very rapidly in Africa. And we know that I think it was 4 or 5 leaders died, horrible quick deaths when they tried to stand up against the pandemic plan and had other plans for their country. Like the guy, I think Nigeria was one of the ones that died, not Niger, but also Tanzania, that I don't know, parliament head or whatever you call him. I don't know if he was a president or what his title was, but he came out with a Tanzanian solution to the pandemic, which was quinine and vitamin C, and it was tonic water. And maybe, I don't remember if it had ivermectin, but I know it had Artemisa, which is something similar to that. It's, something, natural food product that was working against COVID. And then he mysteriously died, very sad demise, along with several other African leaders that were resisting in the same way, using the kinds of things that had always worked before for their country and continued to work. Africa didn't have such a big problem as it was projected. So
many African leaders consulted their own doctors. Mm-hmm. And remember that there is still largely, up until the 1970s, most African nations were very tribal, and there would be, each tribe had its knowledge that they had accumulated over thousands of years. And the tribal chiefs would try to encourage local solutions. They've dealt with worms for thousands of years. Mm-hmm. They've dealt with different kinds of parasites for thousands of years.
Malaria, yeah.
And they tried to tell their people that the WHO can't find a one-size-fits-all solution.
Mm-hmm. Well, finally, I think if you can't hear them saying that, the WHO, you can't hear what those laws are being changed because they're couched in a lot of language that just isn't filtering into the news at all, then that you can't do anything. But once you can actually hear what's happening, you can rise, shake the bars and say, hey, or get out your tin cup and bang, and things can change. So let's hope it isn't too late.
Well, they are trying to change I think there was a meeting about 5 or 6 weeks ago where 27 African and East Indian countries, I guess it was the health minister, no, it was the security ministers of 27 countries got together and said, we know what the CIA is doing in our respective countries, and we want them out. Yeah. Now, I've had a hard time getting hold of transcripts of this meeting, but I am going to do it. And as soon as I do, I'll send out an email to everyone, letting them know where they can find that link.
Yeah, I think Redacted had a 20-minute broadcast or so on that, specifically on what happened, how that came about. So that might be one source that would have that link into it. Let's see. Well, speaking about sort of what used to be third world countries, but are now doing better than we are in a lot of ways, I do have a link to Fenbendazone talking about, she's a wonderful, amazing Indian woman who is a physicist, but she's really risen, she's about my age, she's risen to really represent the farmers who are all committing suicide trying to use Monsanto solutions. and losing their farms and losing their ancient way of life that was working. So she became their advocate and has really brought in health measures and farming techniques to India and made a really big difference. But if you skip down to that Fenbendazone one, it's just a couple of minutes, but we could look at that. Or Vandana, sorry, I'm saying her name wrong. Oh, she's not, there's no sound.
From Hitler's
So start it over.
Chemicals made to kill.
Yeah, this was a really good one.
Are pesticides, insecticides. Their origins come from Hitler's labs. Chemicals made to kill people in concentration camps are the same chemicals that are being used now. After the wars, they tried to shift some of the chemicals to the third world in the name of the Green Revolution. Policymakers, well, they were not looking at its ecological impact, they were not looking at its hunger impact, they were not looking at the impact on farmers, they were just looking at how much wheat and rice comes to the market. All of these important considerations of food are neglected, and all we measure is how much does it weigh. This quantification and commodification of food is at the root of the food crisis. It doesn't measure how healthy the farm is. It doesn't measure how well the farmers are doing. Across the world, farmers are dying because they're not able to meet ends. Food is a new speculative commodity, now already pushed to inflation because of speculation on food. That means there's a polarization growing. The rural families get poorer. Poor people spend more buying food. We need to go the way of food sovereignty, not the way of food dependence. Otherwise, we have extinction. My name is Dr. Dr.SHIVA.
Okay. She reminds me of a man that, I'm sorry. She reminds me of a gentleman that came to our university, Rensselaer Polytech in 1984, and told us that there were Indians on the cargo dock loading bags of rice, and they were dying of hunger. They couldn't afford to eat any of the rice that they were loading onto the ship.
Yeah, that's ironic and horrific at the same time. Yeah, well, she's so articulate and she's a real force. But I think that is something we talked about on this protecting our nest is food sovereignty and how we can become responsible for more of our own food and work together to. It's fun. It's fun to grow food. It's been a blast. I spent the last couple of days out working on the chicken coop because I was getting all full of poop, and it's like hard work, but you get to meet the birds. They become your friends, and it's really wonderful to watch the vegetables growing and be able to pick out the weeds and the icky leaves and throw them to the chickens and just sort of be part of that whole cycle and not just get everything from the grocery store. I have a teeny little yard in the middle of the city. I'm 4 minutes from downtown and it's a undersized lot, so you can do it in containers on your porch. You can do it however you can. You can grow some medicinal herbs or some basil for your Greek salad or tomatoes. If you just have a little patch of sun, even coming in your window, there's stuff you can do. So just become part of that, and you understand it in a different way. And I think it brings meaning too. You just, to eat your own food that you grew, it tastes better.
It does taste better.
Yeah.
And because you're less nervous. You don't, you buy food in a supermarket, then you don't know exactly what you're eating, but you know
Well, I
what
think
you're.
it's beyond that. I think there's also intent and love that's in there. And even if it's getting, the aluminum nanoparticles or whatever, it becomes protected by that intent. So it's more than just, like she said, quantification. It's the quality of the whole endeavor.
Yeah, Amber's kids are very excited about they have various little projects throughout
Mhm.
the yard, and they're very excited about growing their own food, and not many kids at their respective schools, are doing that. So they have a lot of stories to tell,
Oh, that's
and I
great.
think it's great for kids to get. If you have kids, get them involved. It's a lifelong teaching experience, and even if you live in an apartment building, especially if you have a balcony that faces south, there, no matter how big or how small your balcony is, use that to plant some herbs, some rosemary, thyme or something else.
Yeah, it can add a lot to your cooking. And if you have kids, even little kids, I got a little kid here, and someone gave him this big plastic bulldozer that you can ride. And so he just gets such a kick out of, either having it in the yard by the garden or out by the chickens, and he'll make all the noises. And it can be really fun, and kids love to be involved in it too. It's way better than TV. Get outside. The summer is so great because everything's just vibrant and alive, growing. But even in a little postage stamp yard, you can have a blast.
Right. And up until a certain age, you can convince the kids that this is fun. I mean, it's a game.
Yeah, it is fun. Yeah, and just the noise of the chickens going cheep 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 cheep. I mean, we hear it when Tara gets on. You hear those little cheepers, and it's really peaceful noise. It's they have nice voices. I didn't quite realize that. I thought they'd be kind of screechy and like peacocks or something, but not at all. It's very, very pleasant and soothing to have that backdrop. So yeah, we can participate in this
I
a
took a
little
peek
bit
at that
more.
JFK video that reminded me of what had actually planned the show to be about this morning. I wanted to start it over with you and Amber and Tara first, but I wanted to get back to JFK's original. And he wasn't the only one; he was the spokesman for it. But that group of civic leaders on the East Coast that had a certain direction that they wanted to take the country in, and then it didn't go that way. But
Yeah. Well, I think one of the things that he talked about even before he became president, when he was in England with his dad, was, why can't we have a peace agenda and a peace plan, instead of having all the wars all the time. And I think he was in World War II. He saw the horrors of it. And everybody that came back from World War II wanted a peace plan. And that's what he was looking for the whole world, and that's what this is about. And this speech that he's giving to the UN, I believe, was right before he was killed. So it gives us another possible motive for unraveling why that happened and what it meant for all of us. So go ahead and play this couple minutes.
okay.
This is about the space plan.
Interesting clip to start out. that really exemplifies that. So Matt, I'm going to just add that video to the stream. If you could maximize that and play that,
yes,
then we can give people a little taste of the history that we're not told about. The JFK wasn't just battling the Soviets in the Cuban Missile Crisis. He was suggesting cooperation. This is really interesting to think about. So let's play that.
All right, let's do this. This is about a month or so before he died, a speech at the United Nations in New York, 1963.
Mr. Kennedy hails the peace in the Cold War while taking note of Cuba and Berlin. Then he makes a startling proposal.
Finally, in a field where the United States and the Soviet Union have a special capacity in the field of space, there is room for new cooperation, for further joint efforts in the regulation and exploration of space. I include among these possibilities a joint expedition to the moon. Space offers no problems of sovereignty. By resolution of this assembly, the members of the United Nations have forsworn any claim to territorial rights in outer space or on celestial bodies, and declare that international law and the United Nations Charter will apply. Why, therefore, should man's first flight to the moon be a matter of national competition? Why should the United States and the Soviet Union, in preparing for such expedition, become involved in immense duplications of research, construction, and expenditure?
Yeah, I'm glad
Wow.
you chose to run that first. It's something I never even saw before. About 2 years ago, somebody brought this to my attention. I had no idea that in the lead up to his murder, that he had put on the table something that would have immediately.
Well, this is a really long video, so we don't have to hear the whole thing, but
Okay.
it is a really good conversation. I mean, Matthew Arrett is always really, really interesting, and he has a lot to say. So but I don't think very many of us have heard it. You know, he hadn't heard of it, and I don't remember.
Oh, I hadn't heard of it until you told me.
Yeah, so it was planned, a way to put our tax dollars towards cooperation instead of the military-industrial complex that Eisenhower had warned him of. So he had a plan to do that, and he'd actually been thinking about it before he even became president. He spoke about it, a peace plan. So it included space, and there's lots of things that we could better spend our money on than the war in Ukraine, that's for sure, or anywhere, you know. And I think there's one there's one that Victoria Nuland is preparing for in Niger, because they're saying forget it. So she wants to go in there. So let's just say sorry, Victoria, we're not going to do that.
Well, Victoria,
I'm hearing some noise. Is that on your end? Is that the library?
yeah, there's people in the background here.
Okay.
The Victoria Nuland, I'm glad you brought her up, because she continues to be to run as the so-called designated expert on all of these nations, and that her input and her little group in Washington have to be at the forefront of any discussion, and we have to show people why they believe that they have to run things, and which often lead up to events such as the Maidan massacre.
Yeah. Well, I'm just, again, happy to see what's happening in Africa, and I hope that she's not successful in going back in and taking control over there like they thought they were doing. I think they're running out of money. I think there is something finite about assets, and they can't keep doing. It's a dead end, and I think we're about at the end here. Let's come up with a different way of being in the world than regime change everywhere we go just to benefit us. And that's what the people in Africa are so angry about now, and other places, is that all the taxes are, all the resources and the wealth is being moved into the hands of the few, and away from the people who should own the assets. And that's the point about the IP too, the intellectual protocol, that is really a big part of what's going on with the pandemic, that all these little bits of money are going out to people like Fauci, also all the universities that were part of this, when really all the money came from our taxes. Some of it did come from foundations, but the bulk of it came from we the people to do all these horrible things that we don't agree with. And so it's time to take that back and just say, no, that's not right.
Well, Carol, I've seen with my own eyes the plan for a new San Antonio. It's one of these mega cities, and the mega cities are real, and they are really being planned out thoroughly. This particular volume, this was one volume of a multi-volume set for the new San Antonio. Every nut and bolt. This had to do mainly with the transportation, the high-speed rail that circles around the city. It sounds
Is it
great.
a smart city, or is it a C? There's different versions of these in the smart cities. Our Portland, I found out, is a C40 city.
Right. The smart cities are a stepping stone. But eventually, once they have all the rural land and they move everyone who lives on a rural property into one of these cities, this is like a 2060. This thing about getting everyone off of rural property and turning them into beautiful parks. That is somewhere between 2060 and 2080. But the mega cities have already taken a lot of our tax money because I studied just on the basis of seeing this volume, which the guy who printed it out grabbed it away from me because as if I was going after his child. I did some research and looked at, for example, MIT architecture and what everybody was working on. There is, I think that up to 850 million researcher hours have been spent on the mega cities. And that's why they invented cruise ships, because with cruise ships, they're gaining data on how to build a mega city. How do you get people to live in harmony in close quarters? So the theory is that you will, I forget if there's going to be like 200 worldwide. There's going to be 200 of these mega cities. New San Antonio is going to have 27 million. But they say it's a good thing because then everyone will be enjoying life like on a cruise ship. Yes, you'll do a little work. You'll work 4 hours a day, but you'll enjoy it. And you will be happy. Now, that is the default position. If we don't take action right now against the World Health Organization and other things, for example, the 5G towers that Paul G talks about,
right?
There are things that we can do, but we have to let young people, especially young men under 35, know what the intentions are of this group at the top and why they need to stop it, because the end justifies the means for these people. And we have to say, no, you can't experiment on our children. You can't do all of these terrible things just because you think you have some better plan in the future for us.
Well, that reminded me of a link that I'd put in a few weeks ago, and I did just dig it up. But it's on a floating city of 40,000 that floats around in the ocean. And this is one that I think Japan has designed and proposed, but I think there's other ones too. And this is just an article, but it does have a series of photos, but it's completely contained. It's all these like high rises in a big circle, and then it has, well, you can see, Go ahead and click on it. I put it in the private chat.
Okay. Here we go. Yeah, it is very ambitious. Very, very ambitious.
Well, I guess that link didn't work.
No,
Oh,
it
here
did.
it is.
It's up.
Oh, okay, good.
It's a big city, so it took a while to load.
Yeah. Well, there's like 3 or 4 photos of the close-ups, but you can see it just floats in the middle of the ocean, so you're completely isolated from the world or anything else. So you could experiment with all these different cities and have different things you want to test. The high rises are all around the outside ring, and it talks a little bit about it's just so limited. It's really just a lot of people in a tiny, tiny space that can't ever benefit from being part of the world or having their own space to grow food or anything. It's all underneath this is the sewage treatment, and that turns into food. And it's part of it is kind of a cool idea, a way to deal with a lot of people, but not if it is pure surveillance and control, because there's, you could see how you could just limit any exchange with the rest of the world and something like that. I don't know, John, did we lose you? Are you going to come back? Well, let's see if we have any comments here. Susan suggests that if we grow plants on a balcony, we grow peppermint because it's a deterrent to rodents. Well, I have some other stuff. I don't know if I can share anything, but John, wherever you are, come on back. And I think another thing that I sort of wanted to talk about today is this climate change idea. I'm noticing in my city here that more and more people are hearing the messaging that's coming through about climate change. So they're buying lots and lots of electric cars, even though they're not seeing the documentation that shows the batteries. If you look at the power it takes and the barrels of oil it takes to actually mine all the rare earth elements for the batteries, and you take that into consideration, it would take years and years to get more of a benefit based on barrels of oil from an electric car. And so really the whole idea of climate change and the things we're actually being told to do about it are really not based in science. And I had a great clip, so maybe if he comes back, we can look at it. But maybe we'll just have a short one if he doesn't come back. But it was some testimony on climate change with John Kerry. Oh, here you are.
Here I am. Sorry about that.
You vanished away. So welcome back,
Yeah,
John.
John Kerry continues to be an enigma for me ever since the Iran nuclear deal. Okay, let me pull up that clip.
Yeah, we didn't get to finish looking at the city, but maybe we can do that at another time.
Okay, let's. You want to go back to the city?
Oh, I don't know. It's really depressing for me to look at that city, actually. Let's look at John Kerry.
But the technology that they use to build and design these cities, if they would allow us, everybody, to utilize or take advantage these newer technologies, there's no limit to what we can accomplish. There really isn't.
I think you're right. And I think that just keeping a few select scientists being able to access a lot of the science that is not taught, that they're not getting the benefit from all of our brains solving problems, which is really what we're here to do, figure out how to solve problems.
Yeah,
so
and I'm continuously amazed at some of the younger people, like at here at Georgia Tech, Georgia State, the community colleges around the country. There are some really good ideas, and unfortunately, like I said at the start of the show, they don't want certain technologies to go into enter the public domain, because we would become prosperous. And in the short term, sorry guys, but in the short term, you don't get to be prosperous. You have to tighten your belt and just accept the brand new world.
Yeah, and I think the climate narrative is really being pushed to that idea that it's the people's fault. Solve our sorry.
Yeah, here John Kerry is giving a testimony. He's testifying in front of the Foreign Affairs Committee, and unfortunately, most of the people on the Foreign Affairs Committee have, according to David Underdown, have ties to a certain group of people, very powerful people on the East Coast. But let's listen to this testimony. And
yeah, you don't need to play the whole thing. Just move it up to what did I say? 4 minutes and 46 seconds.
46.
Really. Yeah, that's a real poignant little clip there.
But before I play it, I just want to underline, especially for our newest subscribers, that climate change is the backstop for a lot of this wrongdoing. It's the official, unofficial excuse for a lot of what's going on. If we can break down, show how climate change, especially at schools like Stanford, at MIT, how climate change is, how they're ramming it down the kids' throats, so that they cannot conceive of an ulterior way of doing things. Climate change will be our downfall.
Well, it's not that there isn't climate change, but it's really that the kinds of ideas that are being promoted and that it's all of our fault is what's super wrong.
Billions of years old, in which there were greater heat and there was greater.
Tell me the difference quickly. I've got a little.
The difference is human beings are creating.
Okay, so
this. That's the difference.
So human beings are
we
about
are creating
300,000 years old, but during these periods of time where it was 2,000 parts per million, life existed. As a matter of fact, we're in one
people,
of the lowest
not
periods.
human beings walking around.
We're in one of the lowest periods of carbon in the atmosphere in not only recorded history, in the history of life existing on the planet. In December of 2022, you told the Washington Post we need to remove 1.6 trillion tons of carbon dioxide from the atmosphere via direct air capture. The cost for that is about $1,000 per ton, or $1.6 quadrillion. Now, you said you didn't know, but since 2015, since the last El Nino, about 500 billion tons have been emitted into the atmosphere. During that same period of time, 2015, if you look at the temperature graph, this is from NOAA. The temperature has gone down. Show the next slide. This is from NASA satellite data. Temperature has gone down. You want to have the American taxpayers, my constituents that are having a hard time afford their groceries, pay for a car, buy a new home, spend $1.6 quadrillion to fix a problem that A, doesn't exist, and as a matter of fact, you might be exacerbating, because it's unknown. It is unknown at this time the low level of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere that might actually destroy life, because plant life all depends. As you know, Secretary, plant life all depends on CO2. And when we kill it, then we're done too. I yield the balance.
Congressman, let me just say that I don't agree with what you're saying out there for any number of reasons. I don't have time to go into all of them now, but I'll just tell you point blank that the difference between the periods you're looking at in terms of heat, et cetera, and human input is night and day, number one. Number two, why do you think 195 countries in the world, their prime ministers, their presidents,
Because they're grifting like you are, sir.
Yeah, that's the best part.
That's a pretty shocking statement.
You
that
can
you
stop
believe
it.
that all the scientists in the
They're grifting.
Yes, people are making a ton of money on these sanctions that really are not addressing the real problem. It's not that there's not climate change and that we're not going to have to adapt, but we really need to. It's not just CO2, and by doing this CO2 stuff that they're talking about, we are at an actual low level. If you look at millions of years, a low level of CO2, real close to the bottom, where life will cease to exist. So a lot of these crazy things, like the Bill Gates blanket all over everything of particles, is, the outcome is not necessarily a positive one. And judging by the track record, we can guess where we're headed. So,
Well, I think I told you and Amber and Tara in Citizens Intel that what really the great hypocrisy lies in the fact that many students from my university, Polytechnic of Turin, I've seen many projects come across my desk with the plan to reduce carbon dioxide. For example, an HCCI motor that allows for a 4-passenger vehicle to get 150 miles per gallon, greatly reducing CO2. Why did this never get a dime of funding from the EU or from Cordis if CO2 is a problem? The hypocrisy is staggering.
yeah, it is staggering.
But it's also the mind control aspects.
Mm-hmm.
Whether or not the climate, the rise in CO2 is anthropogenic, regardless of that possibility or how strong it is how, for example, Jordan Peterson debated one of Georgia Tech's experts whose name slips my mind. The way that debate was even though Jordan Peterson doesn't know very much about climate science at all, that debate was pushed everywhere on Twitter. Every kid under 35 saw that debate somewhere. And it was how the Twitter spaces, each Twitter space was positioned or driven down a certain path, a ontological, not necessarily ontological, from the cognitive map in each Twitter space was directed by a special team. I call them the special forces of Twitter.
Yeah, and there may be some shift, but they're still very powerful at directing things. And I think the message that the idea of repeating the same thing is working. It actually is working to mesmerize people. And the idea that it's human created and therefore it's your fault and you are, killing the world. There's plenty of stuff we can band together and figure out how to do. And there are, like you mentioned, many solutions that are being ignored. And that's the problem, really. There's lots we can do. I think we need CO2. I think we need plants. So I don't think all the emphasis should be there. And we are going to have to adapt to some changes. I just watched a program that talked about how the conveyor belt in the Atlantic Ocean is in fact turning off. This is a macro thing. It happens every once in a while, every so many thousands of years, and it will cause global warming in parts of the world and global cooling in other parts. So this is a real problem, but we're not actually calling it what the real problem is. And we're not really, there's lots of creative solutions for how we can get through some of these changes. But just, stopping breathing CO2 output and, cutting down all the trees is not a good solution, or,
But when we talk about protecting the nest, we have to protect our young people from the mind control and
Right.
show them that their professors in their universities or community colleges might have good intentions, but they themselves are being driven by this mind control machine. Out of the Ivy League schools and the top universities in Europe, like Fontainebleau and Bocconi, they have to understand that mind control is a thing, and that social engineering is a thing, and that they are subject to it.
And there's tons of money going into those financing that sort of research of how can we control people's minds, how can we control people's behavior, what are the carrots that work, so that is being parceled out just like the virus vaccine game, and people are making a lot of money on all the little spin-off companies. The pattern is repeating in so many different areas in a anti-human way, anti-human, anti-life. There's it's really ultimately moving towards a sort of nihilistic philosophy, which we've seen, clearly since World War II and what drove all the horrific things that happened there. But it seems to have insidiously spread out now. It's not just a small cadre that we can see and has a boundary. It's unbounded now. It's in many, many places and moving forward.
Yeah, it is moving. It's moving rapidly forward. I think that the globalist football, especially now with the news in Denmark of the CBDC becoming reality, I think their football is going further downfield, and we have to stop. First of all, we have to stop with the infighting. There are various truth-seeking groups spread across the United States, of which the Osprey community is one, and we have to stop attacking each other and find a way to work together to highlight the real criminals and how they're using us and our children to move their football.
Well, exactly. And I think we do combat that, and we recognize the divide and conquer strategy, the Hegelian dialectic, as being either or. You have to decide, when really they're both the same thing. So we know what to look for, but it still is happening on so many levels, and that divisiveness is truly dangerous. I think that Dr.SHIVA clip that we played a couple of weeks ago, and we couldn't really get in there to talk about it, but it really showed how the people that have all the money, that have all the control, are also talking to each other, even through all the COVID lockdowns, everything. They're still have community, and but yet that's being eliminated as much as possible, systematically, and using AI to do that. There's all these bots, it's being amplified. The divisiveness is amplified. And when we do come together and come up with good ideas, that's being minimized. And that's what the whole divisiveness is. It's tribalism is promoted in the negative sense. Not that we do have groups and we can work together, but that we have groups and we should therefore all be fighting each other.
And there's a special vote a couple of days ago in Ohio regarding the ability to change the Constitution. And I don't think that the reason that this was brought up, the reason this went to a special election or special voting booth, was because they were really worried about the Ohio Constitution. Eventually, if the WHO takes over, the Ohio Constitution goes bye-bye.
Mhm.
That this was really about a divide and conquer strategy.
Mhm.
It was very subtle, the ways in which some of the mechanisms played, especially on the radio, on broadcast radio, mainly the conservative channels in the broadcast arena.
Well, I think you're
The
right that
radio program.
yeah, the messaging has been so carefully crafted and carefully tested in focus groups, and it is really insidious, and it's been very effective for the people that aren't really paying attention. I mean, for those that really are noticing something's wrong and had our spidey senses out there, we've found each other. But the people that were willing to accept that they're the problem, so therefore they have to stay in their little houses and dance with their masks on together in that sense, instead of really have actual meaningful dialogue and really look at why did this happen, what can we do about it, ask those kinds of questions. So but the good news is they are noticing now. They're starting to notice there's a lot more information, just like people can. A lot has come up even in the European Union, but not as much in the Senate. All the Senate hearings, there's just tons of stuff that's coming out for people that are listening, and we can get together. I think with only since we're missing our crew, maybe we could kind of sign off a little early, but that idea of our togetherness is really emphasized with this great closing video when we get to it.
Yeah, I think that it's important to take one example, and it might even be the example of the special election here in Ohio, and walk it through and look at some of the radio broadcasts and show how fine, how sophisticated the divide and conquer strategies are, because that's how they win. That's how their football moves downfield. There are solutions to every problem, but if they can get us all to not agree on what the problems are, then they win. Okay, and I'm trying to load that video, but it's not cooperating with me.
Oh,
Let
that's
me
too
try
bad.
another route. Let me try one more.
Okay, well,
Wait.
while you try that, I'll just make a comment that I think our value as humans is that when we do get together and we look at a problem from all our different perspectives, and that's what we're seeing, then the solutions are just so amplified and come so much faster than when we're not allowed to look at them and one idea gets promoted to everybody. Then that eliminates that possibility of actually getting true creativity synergistically working together to come up with actual solutions that move us forward and enable prosperity and abundance for everybody.
Mhm.
That's definitely possible on a small scale and on a fractal scale, and that's how the universe works. Here we go. And
Okay.
as soon as he starts singing, just turn it off because I think we might run into the copyright problems.
All right.
So just the beginning, like the beginning minute, about approximately.
Okay. Before I
can,
play, I just want to make a quick comment about creativity. The Biomancer on his channel, the Biomancer Perspective, made a comment, a very important comment, observation about creativity being not obeying the laws of thermodynamics,
Mhm.
and that is a large
That's
part.
great.
That is a large part of what we are seeing today. Is this conviction by top scientists, quote unquote scientists, and self-appointed experts, policy experts, in the area of entropy, of that we are going to run into trouble as a species because the laws of thermodynamics say we will. That's
Well, yeah,
not
because
true.
it's basing on entropy, but life itself is negative entropy. It's accumulative, and life begets life. So that is the countervailing argument that we have as human beings. And it's a good one. Negative entropy. It's too bad it's negative, but it is synergy too. Synergism of additive, multiplicative. It's self-organizing. Okay, can
Here
you
we
play
go.
that? You had
Yes.
it up. Let's just say goodbye. So
All
goodbye,
right.
everybody.
Thanks,
This is a
everybody,
great-
for participating.
Yeah.
And let's play us out with this video. Eek, eek.
Eek, eek.
Oh, I
It went
pushed the
away.
wrong button again. It went away. All right, here we go. This is great.
See, they're all working together. Okay.
All
yeah.
right.
That's synergy.
Thanks, that was great. I love that.
We'll just do it one at a time.
Okay, everybody. Thanks again for participating, and we'll see you next week on Protecting the Nest. Goodbye, Carol.
Bye.